How's it going, everyone? This is Dixon of the Ultimate Gamer. I'm logging on. Today I'm going to be talking about original and a remake of one game, Mafia, the first game. There's a few things I like to address about both of them. First things first, there's one thing I want to address about Mafia Definitive Edition. When I think of a Definitive Edition, I usually think it's a remaster port of a game. Well, this is the Definitive Edition of the first game in the Mafia series. 2K Games also released Definitive Edition of the two sequels the same year. And last November, Rockstar Games released Definitive Edition of the Grand Theft Auto trilogy that was from the 6th generation console era, and the original version of the first Mafia game was from the 6th generation as well. Then in 2020, they released a Definitive Edition of the whole trilogy. Well, actually, both Definitive Editions of Mafia 2 and 3 were released individually 4 months before the Definitive Edition of the first game. Now, why is that? Well, when I said I thought the Definitive Editions meant remaster ports of the games, Mafia 2 and 3 were both remastered games from the originals, and GTA Trilogy, that was from the PS2 era, were also remastered ports. They got the name Definitive Edition. But why was Definitive Edition of the first Mafia game released months later after the Definitive Edition of the sequel? Here's the answer. The Definitive Edition of the first Mafia game was not a remaster port. It was a complete remake from the bottom up. Why didn't they just call the new version Mafia Remake or Mafia Reboot? I don't know. That's just a minor gripe, I guess. And for a remake, by all means, I'm not saying a remake of a game that feels out of place for today's standards is a bad thing. I think the remake of this game is awesome and much more balanced than before. It's just given a subtitle, the Definitive Edition for the first Mafia game, especially being as a remake, feels more deceptive compared to the two sequels, which are the remaster games. But I guess they just want to put all three games together into one package as possible, so I guess that makes sense. Now, I do have good memories of the original Mafia game. Since I was always into the GTA type of games from day one, I had the first Mafia game since 2004 on the original Xbox. Oh, pardon me really quick before I jump into that. The first Mafia game originally came out exclusively on the PC in 2002 from Illusion Softworks. It came out a year later after Grand Theft Auto 3 was released from Rockstar Games on the PlayStation 2. Then 2 years later, since the Mafia released on the PC, Mafia came out on the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox consoles. I played it on the Xbox. And I had fun driving vehicles from the early 20th century and that specific decade. And at the time, I just wished Grand Theft Auto series could go back into the early 20th century and like during the Prohibition era and up. Mafia, in a way, is kind of a GTA clone, but at the same time, Mafia was actually original in its own right. Instead of focusing on an open world with many side activities set around the same year, like Grand Theft Auto 3, Mafia puts their heart more into the game being a story with an 8-year storyline from 1930 to 1938. And just like Grand Theft Auto games, Mafia is also set in a fictional city, the Lost Heaven, which was inspired by the real-life crime city events during that time era, like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Now, I've beaten the original Mafia game only once on the original Xbox, and I had good experience with it at the time. But I also had frustrating moments with that one too. I mean, the gameplay is pretty choppy today. On-foot action, you can only see from the back, you can't see a full figure model. I mean, you can only see the character from the back, so it's not like Grand Theft Auto 3 when you're on foot. So the original Mafia game is not much playable for today's standards, even on the PC, which is the best port, and the digital download version of the original Mafia game on PC Came to GOG and Steam in 2017, I think. So it's available for purchase if you're interested. And the YouTuber Nick930 did a direct comparison between the two versions of the original and the remake. And he was spot on completely. So I recommend you check that video out as well as subscribe to his channel so you can get more answers. I'll leave the link below. So, unlike the GTA games from the 6th generation era, the original Mafia game is one 6th generation game that I can't get back into anymore. And that pains me to say that because there's quite a few things I liked about that one, even today. It's just that I can't really get back into it to view them anymore. So if I want to view the best moments of it, I'll just watch the YouTube videos on it. So I actually thought the remake from an 18-year gap was indeed a smart move. And the remake puts the first game back in its place. Even though I'm not 100% down with remakes, majority of the time I despise them. Well, the Hollywood remakes definitely, but gaming in the world is pretty different. And I also recently got around to beating the remake of Mafia. And it was a lot less frustrating than the original version of Mafia. To bear in mind, the remake also has its moments of flaws and glitches that still need to be ironed out time to time. But despite its drawbacks, the Definite Edition of the first Mafia game feels more like a GTA game, since they made the on-foot action and driving action more reliable, as well as adding new stuff, hidden packages and bonus missions in free roaming mode. So I say that the Definite Edition of the first Mafia game is totally worth every cent. And I also say that the original Mafia game will always have a place in history and always have a place in my heart for being a game that tried so much at the time. But as time goes on, it's time to put that game in the gaming realm heaven. Because the Definite Edition of Mafia, also known as a remake, carries the torch for the first game from this point on. Thank you very much for watching and listening. This is Dixon of the Ultimate Gamer. I'm logging off.